February 24th, 1991, 2300 hours. Tactical assembly area hammer, somewhere along the Kuwait border that most Americans couldn't find on a map if their lives depended on it. But the lives that did depend on it were gathered here in the darkness, waiting for dawn and the orders that would send them north into Iraq. Captain Michael Garrett stood in the commander's hatch of his M1A1 Abrams tank, call sign Warhorse 6, and watched the sandstorm rage across the flat desert horizon like an angry god trying to erase the earth itself. The wind howled, sand peppered his face with tiny stinging impacts that felt like bee stings. He could taste grit between his teeth. The storm was so thick he couldn't see the other tanks in his company, even though he knew they were parked less than 50 meters away in the tactical formation. Inside the turret, the radio crackled with static and intermittent transmissions as the battalion command net tried to maintain communications through the weather. The words came through broken, but clear enough. All Warhorse elements, this is Sabre 6. G-Day is confirmed. I say again, G-Day is confirmed. H-hour is 0400 hours. We crossed the berm into Iraq at first light. Acknowledged by platoon. Garrett keyed his microphone. His voice was steady despite the adrenaline starting to build in his chest like a physical pressure. Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, acknowledged. First platoon ready. He released the transmit button and looked down into the turret at the three men who were his crew, his responsibility, his brothers in everything but blood. They looked back up at him with faces that were young, but already carrying the weight of what was coming. Doc Williams, the gunner, was 29 years old and had more combat training than most men twice his age. His father had been a tanker in Korea. Doc's hands rested on the gunner's controls with the casual familiarity of a concert pianist touching his instrument. Those hands never shook, never hesitated. When Doc Williams pulled the trigger, men died. Jimmy Kowalski, the loader, was 21 and looked even younger. Chicago kid with an accent that made him sound like he was auditioning for a gangster movie. He kept a photo of his mother tucked into the padding of his combat vehicle crewman helmet. He had been loading tank rounds since he was 19, and his speed was legendary in the battalion. Kowalski could reload a main gun in 3 seconds flat. In tank combat, 3 seconds was the difference between killing and being killed. Luis Dominguez was the driver, 19 years old, from a small Texas border town that had produced soldiers for every American war since 1836. He sat in the driver's hall with his face pressed against the vision blocks, unable to see anything in the sandstorm, but trusting that when the time came, he would drive this 63-ton machine exactly where it needed to go. Dominguez had never driven anything bigger than a pickup truck before the Army trained him on the Abrams. Now he could navigate this beast through terrain that would break lesser vehicles, and do it in the dark, and do it under fire. These were his men. Garrett looked at the small photo he had taped to the inside of his hatch, positioned where he could see it whenever he stood in the commander's position. 3 generations looked back at him from that faded photograph. His grandfather, Colonel William Garrett, stood tall and proud in his World War II uniform with the Medal of Honor ribbon on his chest. The photo had been taken in 1945 after the Battle of the Bulge, after Bastogne, after he had held a critical road junction against an entire German panzer battalion for 3 days with just 5 Sherman tanks. Grandfather William had died in 2005 at the age of 86, but before he died, he had told Michael the stories. The real stories, not the sanitized versions that made it into the history books. War is iron, his grandfather had said, iron shaped by fire. You'll understand when your time comes. Beneath that photo was another one, his father, Colonel James Garrett, in Korea in 1951. The photo showed a young lieutenant sitting on the hull of an M26 Pershing tank, somewhere near the Chosin Reservoir during the desperate winter fighting. His father's eyes in that photo were already haunted, already carrying the weight of things that no photograph could capture. Things that Michael had grown up watching destroy his father one bottle at a time. The third photo was Michael himself at his West Point graduation in 1986. His grandfather had been there, proud and beaming. His father had not attended, too drunk, too broken, too angry at Michael for following in footsteps that had led to so much pain. 3 generations of Garrett men, 3 wars, 3 tanks. His grandfather had come home a hero. His father had come home broken. Tomorrow, Michael would find out which one he would become. The sandstorm began to die down as midnight approached. The wind dropped from a roar to a whisper. Visibility improved from 0 to maybe 100 meters. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant and cold and indifferent to the violence that was about to unfold beneath them. Garrett climbed down into the turret and pulled the hatch closed above him. The interior of the tank was cramped, hot despite the cold desert night outside, and smelled of oil and sweat and the peculiar metallic odor that every combat vehicle carried like a signature. He squeezed into the commander's seat on the right side of the turret. Doc Williams was to his left in the gunner's seat. Behind them, Kowalski stood in the loader station. Below in the hall, Dominguez was already running through his pre-combat checks on the drivetrain. Garrett pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were starting to tear. The letter had been forwarded from the States through the military postal system. It had taken 3 weeks to reach him. The envelope was marked with his father's return address. He had read it a dozen times already. He read it again. Michael, if you're reading this, you're about to go into combat. I can't stop you. I can't protect you. But I need you to understand something. When the shooting starts, forget about glory. Forget about me. Forget about your grandfather. Just bring your boys home. That's the only victory that matters. Your father. Simple words. No apology for missing the graduation. No apology for the years of silence. No apology for the nights Michael had spent as a child listening to his father scream in nightmares about burning tanks and men who couldn't get out. Just those few sentences written in a shaky hand that might have been emotion or might have been withdrawal from whatever bottle had been keeping the memories at bay. Garrett folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his map case. Doc Williams was watching him. The gunner didn't say anything, but his eyes held the question. Garrett met his gaze. He spoke quietly, conscious that everything said inside a tank was heard by everyone. From my father. Doc nodded slowly. The gunner's own father had died in Korea in 1951, killed when his M26 Pershing tank was hit by Chinese artillery during the retreat from the Chosin Reservoir. Doc Williams had been born in 1962, never knowing his father, raised on stories of a man who had died before he could hold his son. He had become a tanker to understand what his father had died for. 29 years later, he was still looking for the answer. Cap, Doc said, you know what they say about the first time? Garrett waited. They say it's like losing your virginity. Everybody's nervous. Everybody thinks they know what to do. And everybody realizes real quick that knowing and doing are two different things. From the loader's position, Kowalski laughed nervously. The kid's voice cracked slightly. Jesus, Doc, you trying to make this worse? Doc Williams' expression didn't change. His voice remained calm, level, almost gentle. Kid, I'm trying to keep you alive. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence gets you killed. We're about to fight the fourth largest army in the world. They've got more tanks than we do, more artillery than we do, more men than we do. The only thing we've got that they don't is training and technology. So we use both. We stay calm, we stay professional, and we kill them before they kill us. Kowalski swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. How many men you think we'll have to kill tomorrow, Doc? Doc Williams looked at the kid for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of family history that no training could replicate. As many as it takes. And then we go home and try to forget their faces. The radio came alive again. This time it was the battalion commander himself, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Harrison, a man who had commanded tank companies in the final days of Korea and had spent the last 38 years training for exactly this moment. All Sabre elements, this is Sabre 6. Intelligence update. We have confirmed reports of Republican Guard units in our sector. I say again, Republican Guard. These are not the conscripts we expected. These are Saddam's best troops, best equipment, best training. They will fight. We will destroy them. Remember your training, trust your crews, and bring every single one of my tankers home alive. Sabre 6 out. Garrett felt his stomach tighten. Republican Guard, the elite Iraqi formations, the troops who had fought Iran for 8 years and learned their lessons in blood. They would have T-72 tanks, the Soviet export model that was 40 years newer than the old T-55s, and T-62s the regular Iraqi army used. The T-72 had a 125mm main gun and composite armor that could actually pose a threat to American tanks if handled by competent crews. This wasn't going to be the cakewalk some people had predicted. From the driver's station, Dominguez's voice came over the intercom with a slight Texas drawl that always got thicker when he was nervous. Cap, we gonna be okay tomorrow? Garrett keyed his intercom. He chose his words carefully because every word mattered. because these men would remember what he said in this moment for the rest of their lives, however long or short those lives turned out to be. Dominguez, you're driving the finest tank ever built by human hands. Doc here is the best gunner in the battalion. Kowalski loads faster than physics should allow, and I went to West Point specifically to learn how to keep you idiots alive. Yes, we're going to be okay, but more than that, we're going to win. He heard Dominguez exhale slowly. Hooah, sir. Hooah. The hours between midnight and dawn crawled past with the peculiar time distortion that comes before combat. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like minutes. Garrett dozed fitfully in his commander's seat, never quite sleeping, never quite awake. Around him, his crew did the same. The entire tank company, 14 M1A1 Abrams tanks, sat silent in the darkness and waited for the order that would change all of their lives. At 0330 hours, Garrett's eyes opened. He hadn't set an alarm. His body simply knew. 30 minutes to H hour. Time to move. All Warhorse elements, this is Warhorse 6. Final pre-combat checks. Report status by tank. One by one, his platoon leaders reported in. 14 tanks, 56 men, all systems green, all crews ready, ammunition loaded, fuel topped off, thermal sights calibrated, fire control computers initialized. Every man knew his job. Every man was ready to do it. The sky to the east began to lighten imperceptibly. Not dawn yet, but the promise of dawn. The stars faded. The desert emerged from darkness into the pre-dawn gray that photographers call the blue hour. Garrett pulled his combat vehicle crewman helmet on and adjusted the microphone boom in front of his mouth. He could hear Doc Williams breathing steadily beside him. He could hear Kowalski shifting nervously in the loader's station. He could hear Dominguez tapping his fingers on the driver's controls in a rhythm that might have been nervous energy or might have been prayer. The radio crackled. All Sabre elements, this is Sabre 6, H hour. I say again, H hour. Move to phase line alpha. Good hunting. Sabre 6 out. Garrett keyed his company net. All Warhorse elements. This is 6. You heard the man. Let's go make history. Move out. Below him, Dominguez started the turbine engine. The M1 Abrams didn't have a traditional diesel engine like most tanks. It had a gas turbine, basically a jet engine mounted horizontally in the hull. When it started, it didn't roar. It whined, a high-pitched keening sound that rose in frequency as the turbine spooled up to operating speed. Around him, 13 other turbines started, 14 tanks, 14 crews, 56 American soldiers about to cross into enemy territory and fight for a country most of them had never heard of until 6 months ago. The company began to move. Garrett stood in his hatch as the tank lurched forward. The morning air was cold against his face. He could see the rest of his company now in the growing light. The tanks moved in a wedge formation, his command tank in the center, platoons spread out on either side. They looked like prehistoric monsters emerging from the mist. 63 tons of armor and firepower, moving at 25 miles per hour across terrain that would have stopped wheeled vehicles dead. They reached the berm, the raised earthwork that marked the border between Kuwait and Iraq. Combat engineers had already blown gaps in it during the night. The tanks drove through one by one, and just like that, they were in Iraq. Enemy territory. For the first few hours, there was nothing, just flat desert stretching to every horizon. Occasional clusters of abandoned Iraqi defensive positions, trenches and bunkers hastily evacuated when the American artillery barrage began. White flags tied to whatever poles the defenders could find. Iraqi soldiers emerging from holes in the ground with their hands raised, looking scared and starved and relieved that someone had finally given them permission to stop fighting. Garrett's company drove past them. Other units would handle the prisoners. The tanks had a different mission: find the enemy armor and destroy it. By noon, they had advanced 40 miles into Iraq without firing a shot. Then the radio call came that changed everything. Warhorse 6, this is Warhorse 2-6, contact front. Enemy armor, multiple tracks, moving into defensive positions. Grid coordinates 732-489. Request permission to engage. Garrett grabbed his map and plotted the coordinates. 2 miles ahead, his lead platoon had found something. Warhorse 2-6, this is 6. What are you seeing? 2-6's voice came back tense but controlled. Sir, I'm looking at dug-in armor. Hold down positions. Thermal signature indicates hot engines. They're waiting for us. Can't get a clear count, but I'm seeing at least 12, maybe 15 tanks. They're not moving. They're set up for ambush. Garrett felt his pulse quicken. This was it. First contact. He pulled out his binoculars and scanned the terrain ahead. There, a low ridgeline, maybe 1,800 meters distant. Perfect defensive position. Good fields of fire, high ground. Whoever commanded those Iraqi tanks knew what they were doing. All Warhorse elements. This is 6. Battle formation. 1st and 2nd platoon online. 3rd platoon in reserve. We're going to fix them in place and flank them. Acknowledge. The acknowledgements came back quick and professional. His platoon leaders knew their jobs. Garrett dropped back into the turret and pulled the hatch closed above him. Combat inside a closed tank was safer, but also terrifying in a different way. No visibility except through the vision blocks and thermal sights. No way to hear what was happening outside except through the radio. Just the cramped metal interior and the knowledge that if something penetrated that armor, there would be nowhere to go. "Doc," Garrett said quietly, "do you have eyes on?" Doc Williams had his face pressed against the gunner's sight, the thermal imaging display showing him what the human eye couldn't see. 12 green blobs of heat against the cooler background of the desert. 12 Iraqi tanks waiting to kill them. "I got him, Cap. Range 1,800 meters. Looks like T-72s. Good defensive position." They picked their ground well. Garrett keyed his company net. "All Warhorse elements, weapons tight until my command. Let's see if they're smart or stupid." The company continued to advance. 1,600 meters, 1,500, 1,400. The Iraqi tanks didn't move, didn't fire, just waited. At 1,300 meters, Doc Williams spoke again. "Cap, I got a bad feeling. This is too easy. They should have engaged by now." Garrett was thinking the same thing. Something was wrong. Iraqi tank crews weren't known for their fire discipline, and the effective range of a T-72's gun was about 2,000 meters. They should have been shooting already, which meant they were waiting for something, or they were bait. "All Warhorse elements. This is 6. Halt." I say again, halt. Something's not right here. The company ground to a stop. 14 tanks sitting in the open desert, 700 meters from an enemy they could see but hadn't engaged. The radio crackled with a transmission from the battalion commander. "Warhorse 6, Sabre 6. What's your status? Why have you stopped?" Garrett stared at the thermal display that mirrored what Doc Williams was seeing. 12 Iraqi tanks, 12 targets, 12 chances for this to go very wrong. "Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, enemy is not engaging. Suspect this is a fixing force for a larger element. Request permission to call for artillery strike before we advance." There was a pause. Then the battalion commander's voice came back, and there was an edge to it that Garrett recognized. The edge of a man who had seen this movie before and knew how it ended. "Warhorse 6, negative on artillery. We need to maintain momentum. You are cleared to engage and destroy. Sabre 6 out." Garrett took a breath. Orders were orders, even when they felt wrong. "All Warhorse elements. This is 6. We're going in. 1st platoon, left flank. 2nd platoon, right flank. 3rd platoon with me, center. Staggered advance. Keep your intervals. Watch for counterfire. Execute." The company began to move again. 1,200 meters, 1,100, 1,000. At 900 meters, the Iraqi tanks opened fire. 12 muzzle flashes erupted simultaneously. 12 125mm rounds screamed through the air at speeds approaching a mile per second. The sound was like thunder compressed into a single sharp crack that echoed across the desert. Most of the rounds missed. Iraqi gunners, even Republican Guard crews, didn't have the training or the technology to score first-round hits at this range. But most wasn't all. Warhorse 2-3 took a direct hit to the turret front. The round didn't penetrate. The M1's composite armor was designed to withstand exactly this kind of impact. But the shock of the hit was tremendous. Garrett heard the crew screaming over the radio, disoriented but alive. "All Warhorse elements, return fire. Weapons free." Doc Williams had already identified his target before Garrett finished speaking. The gunner's hands moved with the practiced economy of a man who had done this 1,000 times in training and was doing it for real for the first time, but doing it exactly the same way. Target identified, T-72, range 875 meters, Sabat loaded. "Fire." Doc pulled the trigger. The M1's 120mm main gun is a marvel of engineering. It fired a depleted uranium penetrator round that left the barrel at 1,750 meters per second. At this range, Time to target was less than half a second. The Iraqi tank commander probably never knew what hit him. The Saba round punched through the T-72's frontal armor like it was paper. Inside the enemy tank, the penetrator turned into a superheated jet of molten metal that ignited the ammunition stored in the carousel autoloader at the base of the turret. The T-72 exploded from the inside out. The turret, all 15 tons of it, separated from the hull and flew 20 feet into the air before crashing back to Earth upside down. "Target destroyed," Doc said calmly. His voice held no emotion, no triumph, no regret, just professional acknowledgement of a job done. Behind him, Kowalski was already moving with mechanical precision. The kid yanked the empty shell casing from the breech and let it clang to the turret floor. He grabbed another sabot round from the ready rack, a 50-pound projectile that he handled like it weighed nothing, and slammed it into the breech with a solid metallic thunk. "Up," he shouted. "Tank jargon for the gun is loaded and ready to fire again." 3 seconds. From firing to reloading. 3 seconds that could mean the difference between living and dying. All around them, the rest of the company was engaging. The desert erupted in fire and smoke and the constant thunder of tank guns. Garrett stood in his hatch despite the danger, because a tank commander who couldn't see the battlefield was useless, and watched his company destroy the Iraqi defensive position with methodical, brutal efficiency. In 6 minutes, all 12 Iraqi tanks were burning hulks. 0 American losses. The company began to advance again, moving through the position they had just destroyed. Garrett looked at the burning T-72s as his tank drove past. He could see bodies, blackened shapes that had been men moments ago. Men who had families. Men who had probably been terrified. Men who had died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time wearing the wrong uniform. He forced himself to look at them, forced himself to remember that this was what war actually meant. Not glory, not honor, just death and the smell of burning diesel and human flesh. "Keep moving," he said into the radio. "Stay alert. That wasn't the main force. That was the covering element." "How do you know, sir?" Kowalski asked from the loader station. "Because if I was setting up a defense, that's exactly what I'd do. Put a small force forward to delay and identify the enemy. Pull the main force back to better ground. Make the enemy think they've won. Then hit them when they're relaxed." "So where's the main force, Cap?" Doc Williams asked. Garrett studied his map. Ahead of them, the terrain rose slightly into a shallow valley between 2 low ridge lines. Perfect ambush terrain. Limited maneuver room, high ground on both flanks. "There," he said quietly. "Right there." He was right. At 1400 hours, Warhorse Company entered the valley, and the Republican Guard Tawakalna Division opened fire from both sides. The first indication was a series of impacts in the sand 50 meters to the left of Garrett's tank. Artillery, not tank rounds, artillery, which meant the Iraqis had forward observers calling in fire missions, which meant they had been watching and waiting and knew exactly where the American tanks were. "All Warhorse elements, enemy artillery, execute Battle Drill 3, move, move, move." Battle Drill 3 was simple. Disperse. Get out of the kill zone. Deny the enemy a concentrated target. The company broke formation and the tanks scattered like startled birds, each one racing to get out from under the artillery barrage. But as they moved, thermal sights began picking up new targets. Not in front of them, where the first engagement had been, on both sides, on the ridge lines flanking the valley. "Warhorse 6, this is 2-6. I got enemy armor left flank, multiple targets. Jesus Christ, there's a lot of them." "Warhorse 6, 3-6, enemy armor right flank. They're everywhere." Garrett spun his commander's independent thermal viewer to scan the ridge lines. What he saw made his blood run cold. 30 tanks on the left ridge, maybe more on the right, all in hull-down defensive positions, all with clear fields of fire into the valley, all of them starting to engage. The company was caught in a perfect ambush. "Warhorse 6, this is Sabre 6. What is your situation?" Garrett keyed his battalion net, trying to keep his voice steady even as his tank shuddered from a near miss that threw up a geyser of sand and rock. "Sabre 6, Warhorse 6. We are in contact with enemy armor in prepared defensive positions. Estimate 30 to 40 enemy tanks. We are decisively engaged. Request immediate support." There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Then the battalion commander's voice came back, and Garrett could hear the weight of command in every word. "Warhorse 6, flanking force is 6 hours out. Can you hold your position? Garrett looked at his tactical display. 14 American tanks in the open. 40 or more Iraqi tanks in prepared positions. 6 hours. It might as well have been 6 years. But there was only one answer a company commander could give. "Affirmative, sir, we will hold." Behind him, he heard Kowalski's voice, younger than it had been that morning, more scared than it had been that morning, but still steady. "Cap, how we supposed to hold this for 6 hours?" Garrett looked at his crew. Doc Williams, calm as stone. Kowalski, scared but determined. Dominguez, invisible in the driver's hole, but present in the rumble of the engine and the smooth handling of the tank. "Same way my grandfather held Bastogne," he said quietly. "One shot at a time, one target at a time, 1 minute at a time until the minutes add up to hours and the hours add up to victory." Doc Williams glanced at him. "Your grandfather have 40 tanks shooting at him?" "Something like that." "Did he win?" "He lived. We're here. So I guess he won." "Good enough for me," Doc said, and turned back to his gunner's sight. The battle for the valley had begun. For the next 3 hours, Warhorse Company fought for its life. The Iraqi T-72s had the advantage of position and numbers, but the American M1 Abrams had the advantage of technology and training. The M1's thermal sights could see through dust and smoke and identify targets at ranges where the Iraqi tanks were firing blind. The M1's composite armor could withstand direct hits from the T-72's 25mm gun, at least from the front. The M1's fire control computer could calculate range, wind, target movement, and barrel wear, and put the first round exactly where the gunner aimed. But none of that mattered if the Americans ran out of ammunition or fuel or luck. Garrett stood in his hatch and directed his company like a conductor directing an orchestra. He moved tanks to positions where they could engage. He shifted fire to concentrate on dangerous targets. He called in what little artillery support was available. He kept talking on the radio, keeping his platoon leaders informed, keeping his men calm, keeping the company functioning as a unit instead of 14 isolated tanks fighting 14 separate battles. Doc Williams fired. Kowalski loaded. Dominguez maneuvered. The crew worked with the synchronized precision of men who had trained together until the actions became muscle memory. Target destroyed. Up. Fire. Target destroyed. Up. Fire. The rhythm of tank combat, the rhythm of survival. At 1600 hours, Warhorse 22 took a catastrophic hit to the engine. The tank didn't explode, but it stopped moving, immobilized in the middle of the killing ground. The crew bailed out and ran for cover, while Iraqi rounds walked toward them, each impact getting closer. Garrett made a decision that he knew his father would have understood and his grandfather would have approved of. Warhorse 4-1, retrieve the crew from 2-2. All other elements provide covering fire. The rescue took 4 minutes that felt like 4 hours. 4-1 drove straight into the fire, stopped long enough for the crew to climb aboard, and drove back out while every other tank in the company fired at anything that looked like it might shoot at the rescue vehicle. All 4 crewmen from 2-2 survived. The sun began to set. Temperature dropped. Visibility decreased. The Iraqis had night vision equipment, but it was old Soviet technology inferior to American systems. As darkness fell, the American advantage grew. But so did the ammunition problem. Warhorse 6, this is 2-6. I'm down to 15 main gun rounds. We're rationing shots. Garrett checked his own ammunition. 22 sabot rounds left, less than half a combat load. He keyed the company net. All Warhorse elements, ammunition status report. The reports came back. Some tanks had 20 rounds. Some had 10. One tank was down to 7. They were running dry. At 1800 hours, as the last light faded from the western sky, Garrett's radio crackled with a transmission on a frequency he wasn't expecting. Not the battalion net, not the company net, a different frequency entirely. One that was listed in his communication card as emergency only. Any Warhorse element? Any Warhorse element, this is Ghost 7. How copy? Ghost 7 was an Air Force call sign, forward air controller. What was the Air Force doing on his frequency? Garrett keyed his mic. Ghost 7, this is Warhorse 6. I copy you loud and clear. What can I do for you? The voice that came back was professional, but carried an undercurrent of urgency that made Garrett's stomach tighten. Warhorse 6, Ghost 7. We have a situation. F-16 strike package took a hit from an SA-6 surface-to-air missile approximately 40 minutes ago. 2-ship formation. 1 bird made it back to base. 1 did not. Pilot and weapons systems officer ejected successfully. We have GPS coordinates for their position. They are alive and evading. Iraqi ground forces are searching for them. We need to execute a combat search and rescue. Your position is closest to the downed aircrew. Garrett's mind raced. Rescue a downed pilot. That meant detaching tanks from his defensive position. That meant weakening an already desperate situation. That meant risking more lives to save two. But it also meant leaving no man behind. The fundamental promise that every American service member made to every other. Ghost 7, what's the distance to the aircrew? 15 miles north of your current position. Behind enemy lines, we estimate you have a 2-hour window before Iraqi forces locate them. Garrett did the math. 15 miles, 2 hours. That was doable if they moved fast and didn't run into anything heavy. But it meant splitting his company, leaving the defensive position undermanned, gambling that the Iraqis wouldn't attack while he was gone. He was about to respond when Ghost 7 spoke again, and the words hit Garrett like a physical blow. Warhorse 6, Ghost 7. Be advised, one of the downed aircrew is Colonel James Garrett, currently assigned as liaison officer to 9th Air Force. Confirm you copy that last transmission. Garrett's world stopped. His father, the man who had refused to attend his graduation, the man who had written him the letter about bringing everyone home, the man who had been broken by Korea and had spent 40 years trying to drink away the memories. His father was lying in the Iraqi desert 15 miles away, hunted by enemy soldiers, waiting for someone to come save him. Warhorse 6, Ghost 7, confirm you received last transmission. Garrett's voice, when he found it, sounded strange in his own ears. Ghost 7, Warhorse 6, I copy, stand by. He switched to his battalion net. Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, request immediate communication, priority traffic. The battalion commander came on the line within seconds. Warhorse 6, Sabre 6, send it. Garrett explained the situation. His voice was flat, professional, giving no indication of the storm raging inside him. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Lieutenant Colonel Harrison spoke, and his voice carried the weight of a man making a decision that he knew would haunt him regardless of the outcome. Michael, I know it's your father, but you have a mission, you have a company, you have men depending on you. I cannot authorize you to abandon your position for a rescue mission. I'm sorry, I'll get another unit to handle the CSR. What other unit, sir? We're the only American armor within 20 miles. I'll find someone. You stay put. That's an order. Garrett looked at his crew. Doc Williams was watching him with those calm, knowing eyes. Kowalski was pretending not to listen, but clearly hearing every word. Somewhere below, Dominguez was probably praying. He thought about his grandfather, holding the line at Bastogne while men died around him. He thought about his father, lying in the desert, hunted, terrified, waiting for help that might not come. He thought about the letter. Bring your boys home. That's the only victory that matters. He made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, understood. I will hold position, but request permission to detach one platoon for local security patrol. Our flanks are exposed. I want to make sure we don't get surprised. There was a pause. Harrison knew exactly what Garrett was asking for, and they both knew that Garrett was lying. And they both knew that Harrison was choosing to believe the lie because it was the only way to follow orders and still do the right thing. Warhorse 6, approved. One platoon for security patrol. Don't go far. Sabre 6 out. Garrett switched to his company net. His voice was steady. All Warhorse elements, this is 6. I need 4 volunteers. Warhorse 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, and 1-4. First platoon. We have a rescue mission. 15 miles north, in and out. 2 hours max. Second and third platoons will hold this position. If the Iraqis attack while we're gone, you defend. You do not retreat. You hold until we get back. Acknowledge. Second platoon leader acknowledged immediately. Third platoon leader took a moment longer, and when his voice came back, it was tight. Sir, that leaves 10 tanks to hold against 40. Those are rough odds. Garrett thought about his grandfather at Bastogne. 5 Shermans against a German panzer battalion. 3 days. Impossible odds. But he had held because that's what Garrett's did. They held the line. Then make every shot count, Garrett said quietly. We'll be back before you know we're gone. In his turret, Doc Williams spoke for the first time since the conversation began. Cap, your father is out there. Yes. And you're going to get him. Yes. Then let's go get him. I knew your grandfather. He'd do the same thing. Garrett looked at his gunner, his friend, his brother in everything but blood. Thank you, Doc. The gunner shrugged. Family is family, Cap. Let's bring him home. First platoon, Four M1A1 Abrams tanks broke formation and turned north. Behind them, 10 tanks remained in defensive positions, facing 40 Iraqi tanks in the gathering darkness. The odds were worse than impossible. They were suicidal. But they would hold. They had to hold, because that's what soldiers did. They held the line while others went forward. They stood their ground while others ran to the rescue. They died, if necessary, so that others could live. As Garrett's tank disappeared into the darkness, racing toward a rescue mission that violated every order he had been given, he heard the radio crackle one last time with a transmission from the defensive position. It was Lieutenant Morrison, the second platoon leader, a young officer on his first combat deployment, commanding tanks in the most desperate situation imaginable. His voice was calm, professional, determined. Warhorse 626. We have movement on the ridgeline, thermals showing increased activity. I think they're getting ready to come at us again. Garrett's hand hovered over the transmit button. He wanted to turn around, wanted to stay with his men, wanted to lead them through whatever hell was about to descend on that valley. But his father was 15 miles north, waiting to die. He keyed his mic. 2-6, Warhorse 6. I know you'll hold. I trained you. You're ready. Make your shots count. Watch your sectors. Stay alive. We'll be back soon. There was a pause. Then Morrison's voice came back, and there was a hint of a smile in it, the kind of dark humor that soldiers use when they're terrified but trying not to show it. Sir, we'll be here. Just hurry up. These Iraqis don't seem to understand that they're supposed to be losing this war. Garrett smiled despite himself, despite everything. On our way, 2-6. Hold the line. Warhorse 6 out. The four tanks accelerated to their maximum speed, turbines screaming, racing through the Iraqi desert toward a rescue that might already be too late. Behind them, 10 tanks waited in the darkness as Iraqi forces massed for another assault. The mathematics were brutal. The odds were impossible. But mathematics had never stopped a Garrett before. His grandfather had held Bastogne. His father had survived Korea, barely. Now it was Michael's turn to write his page in the family's history. One way or another, before this night was over, he would find out if he was the hero or the broken man. Or perhaps, in war, there was no difference. The desert swallowed the sound of the turbines as the tanks disappeared into the darkness, racing toward uncertain salvation, leaving behind desperate defense, and carrying forward the burden of impossible choices that would echo through generations yet unborn. The line would hold, or it would break. Men would live, or they would die. And Michael Garrett, third-generation tanker, would discover what kind of man he truly was when the iron was tested by fire. February 25th, 1991, 2200 hours, 15 miles north of friendly lines, deep in Iraqi-controlled territory where the only law was survival and the only mercy was a quick death. Captain Michael Garrett stood in the commander's hatch of his M1A1 Abrams as it raced through the darkness at 45 miles per hour, a speed that was reckless for a 63-ton tank crossing unknown terrain in the dead of night. The turbine engine screamed behind him like a banshee warning of death to come. Around him, 3 other tanks from 1st Platoon maintained formation, their thermal signatures visible on his commander's display as green ghosts moving through a black world. Behind them, 6 tanks held a defensive position against impossible odds. Ahead of them, his father lay somewhere in the desert, hunted by an enemy that showed no quarter to downed pilots. The radio crackled with Ghost 7's voice, the Air Force forward air controller who was coordinating the rescue from somewhere safe and distant. Warhorse 6, Ghost 7, last known position of downed aircrew is Grid 792-538. Advise they have infrared strobes for identification. Iraqi patrols searching the area. Recommend you move fast. Garrett keyed his mic, eyes scanning the horizon through his night vision goggles. Ghost 7, Warhorse 6, Roger. ETA to Objective 15 mics. Have them pop strobes when they hear turbines. We'll be the loud ones. Copy that, Warhorse 6. And Captain, your father says to tell you he's sorry he missed your graduation. Garrett's throat tightened. He forced the emotion down, locked it away in the place where soldiers put feelings that could get them killed. Ghost 7, tell him we'll discuss it when I get him home. Warhorse 6 out. In the turret below him, Doc Williams spoke over the intercom. The gunner's voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of concern that only came from experience. Cap, we're making a lot of noise. Every Iraqi within 10 miles knows something big is moving through their backyard. Can't be helped, Garrett replied. We go slow, they find my father before we do. We go fast, maybe we get there first. Speed is security. And if we run into something heavy, then you do what you do best, Doc. You kill it. The thermal display showed movement ahead. Small heat signatures. 3 of them. Garrett's pulse quickened. Contact front, he called over the platoon net. 3 dismounts, 200 meters. Could be our guys. Could be Iraqi patrol. Hold fire until positive identification. The tank slowed but didn't stop. At 100 meters, Garrett saw it. A flashing infrared strobe invisible to the naked eye but blazing like a beacon through night vision. The signal every downed pilot carried. The signal that meant American. Ghost 7, Warhorse 6, I have visual on IR strobe. Moving to extract. The 4 tanks formed a protective box around the position. Garrett's tank pulled up 20 meters from where 2 figures crouched in a shallow depression in the sand. He could see them clearly now through his night vision. 2 flight suits, 2 helmets, 1 figure supporting the other who appeared to be limping badly. Garrett keyed the external intercom that allowed people outside the tank to talk to the crew. Identify yourselves. One of the figures straightened. Even through the green glow of night vision, even after 23 years, Garrett recognized his father's silhouette, the way he stood, the way he held himself despite obvious pain. His father's voice came through the external speaker, hoarse and strained. Colonel James Garrett, United States Air Force. This is Captain Sarah Chen, my pilot. We've been evading for 3 hours. Glad to see you, whoever you are. Garrett pulled off his combat vehicle crewman helmet so his father could see his face in the faint starlight. It's Michael, Dad. I am here to bring you home. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then his father's voice came back, and there was something in it that Garrett had never heard before. Not pride exactly, not gratitude. Something deeper. Something that sounded like a man seeing his son for the first time in years and realizing he didn't recognize him anymore. Michael, you shouldn't have come. You have a mission. The mission is bringing everyone home, Garrett said quietly. You taught me that. In your letter. His father started to respond, but Captain Chen cut him off. The pilot was young, maybe 30, with her arm in an improvised sling and a gash across her forehead that looked painful, but not life-threatening. With all due respect, sirs, we can have this family reunion later. I'm picking up vehicle noises to the east. Multiple engines. Moving this way. Garrett heard it too. Diesel engines. Not the high-pitched whine of American turbines. The lower, rougher sound of Soviet-made power plants. Iraqi vehicles. Getting closer. Everybody on board, now. His father and the pilot climbed onto the back deck of the tank, gripping the external handholds that were designed exactly for this kind of emergency passenger recovery. Garrett dropped into the turret and pulled the hatch shut. All Warhorse 1 elements, we have the package. Moving back to main body. Stay alert. We've got company. The 4 tanks began to move south, back toward friendly lines. Back toward the 6 tanks holding the valley against odds that got worse with every passing minute. The diesel engine sounds got louder. Contact right, Doc Williams called out. Multiple vehicles, looks like BTRs, Soviet armored personnel carriers. 3 of them, range 600 meters. Do they see us? If they don't now, they will in about 10 seconds when we drive past them. The BTRs were old Soviet 8-wheeled armored vehicles, lightly armored, armed with a 14.5mm machine gun, used by the Iraqis for transporting infantry and reconnaissance. Not a serious threat to an M1 Abrams in direct combat, but dangerous in numbers and capable of calling in heavier forces. Garrett made a decision. Ignore them, we don't have time for a fight, keep moving. Sir, if they radio our position, we'll have every Iraqi tank in the sector on our heads. Then we move faster than they can respond. All elements, increase speed, best possible time back to the valley. The tanks accelerated. The BTRs saw them. Garrett watched through his thermal sight as the Iraqi vehicles turned to pursue. One of them opened fire with its machine gun. The rounds pinged harmlessly off the Abrams' rear armor. It was like throwing pebbles at a freight train. But then the BTR stopped moving. Garrett saw one of them deploy a radio antenna. They were reporting. Doc, take out that antenna vehicle, 1 shot. Make it count. Doc Williams' hands moved across his controls. The turret traversed smoothly despite the tank's speed. The gun stabilization system compensated for the rough terrain. At 600 meters, moving at 40 miles per hour, Doc Williams put a 120mm high explosive round exactly where it needed to go. The BTR exploded in a ball of orange flame. The other 2 BTRs scattered, disappearing into wadis and behind terrain features. But the damage was done. The radio call had been made. The Iraqis knew American armor was operating behind their lines. Cap, his father's voice came through the external intercom. The speaker was mounted on the back deck where he clung to the tank's handholds. You need to know something. When our F-16 got hit, we were on a reconnaissance mission. We saw Iraqi armor massing. A lot of it. Looks like they're preparing a major counterattack. Where? Same sector you're in. They're bringing up reinforcements. I saw at least 50 tanks moving south, maybe more. They're not retreating, they're reinforcing. Garrett felt ice form in his stomach. 50 more tanks, added to the 40 already engaged with his company. That was 90 Iraqi tanks total, against his 14 M1s, well 13 now, minus the one that had been immobilized. The numbers were impossible. When did you see this movement? 2 hours ago. They could be in position by now. Garrett keyed his battalion net. Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, priority traffic. He relayed what his father had told him. When he finished, there was a white-long silence on the other end. Then Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice came back, tense and clipped. Warhorse 6, confirm you just told me there are potentially 90 enemy tanks in your sector. Affirmative, sir. Source is Colonel James Garrett, Air Force liaison, who conducted aerial reconnaissance 2 hours prior to being shot down. Another pause. Garrett could almost hear his battalion commander calculating, weighing options, looking at maps that showed how thinly spread the American forces were across hundreds of miles of Iraqi desert. Warhorse 6, I'm sending 2nd Battalion to reinforce your position. ETA 4 hours. Can you hold that long? 4 hours. Garrett looked at his fuel gauge, looked at his ammunition counter, looked at the tactical display showing his tiny force scattered across hostile territory. We'll hold, sir. We don't have a choice. That's the spirit, Captain. I'm also getting you priority on artillery support. Call for fire whenever you need it. Save your tank rounds for close work. Sabre 6 out. Garrett switched back to his platoon net. All Warhorse 1 elements. We're heading into something heavy. When we get back to the valley, it's going to be bad. Check your ammo. Check your fuel. Check your heads. We're going to need everything we've got and then some. The acknowledgments came back quick and professional. These were his men, his brothers. They would follow him into hell if he asked. And he was about to ask exactly that. From the back deck, his father's voice came through again. Michael, how bad is it? At your defensive position. We left 6 tanks holding against 40. Now it might be 90. We've been fighting for 8 hours. We're low on everything except determination. His father was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Garrett recognized. The weight of a man who had been where Garrett was now, who had faced impossible odds and survived them, and who knew exactly how thin the line was between survival and catastrophe. Michael, I need to tell you something about Vietnam, about why I left the service, about why I couldn't watch you become a tanker. Dad, this isn't the time. Yes, it is. Because in about 20 minutes, you're going to face the same thing I faced. You're going to have to make decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. And you need to know that whatever you decide, whatever you do to keep your men alive, it's the right choice. What happened in Vietnam, Dad? His father's voice was barely audible over the roar of the turbine and the clatter of the tracks. Tet Offensive, 1968. My platoon, 5 M48 Patton tanks, got ambushed outside Hue City. We were escorting a supply convoy. 20 North Vietnamese PT-76 light tanks hit us from 3 sides. We were outnumbered 4-1. My tank commander, Captain Robert Williams, he was your gunner's father. Doc Williams' father, Garrett said quietly. Doc told me he died in Vietnam. He did, but not that day. That day, Captain Williams saved all of us. He figured out that the Vietnamese tanks had a weakness. Their crews were brave, but poorly trained. They'd fire their main gun, then button up to reload. 5-6 seconds where they were blind. That was the window. We learned to bait them into shooting first, then hit them during their reload cycle. Did it work? We destroyed 17 enemy tanks, lost 2 of our own. Captain Williams got us out alive. But a month later, his tank hit a mine. He died instantly. I was the senior officer. I had to write the letter to his family. I had to tell his 10-year-old son that his father was dead. Doc Williams. Your gunner. That's Captain Williams' son. Garrett stared at the back of Doc Williams' helmet, visible in the cramped turret space. Does Doc know? His father's voice was barely a whisper. I never told him. I was too much of a coward. I couldn't face the son of the man who saved my life. The radio interrupted the moment. Warhorse 6, this is 2-6. We are heavily engaged. Estimate 20-plus enemy tanks attacking from multiple directions. We've destroyed 8, but they keep coming. Ammunition critical. I say again, ammunition critical. Garrett's hands tightened on his commander's controls. 2-6-6. We're 5 mics out. Hold what you've got. Artillery's available. Use it. Already did, sir. Fire missions are keeping them back but not destroying them. We need you here. Now. On our way, 2-6. Hang on. Garrett looked at his tactical display. 3 miles to the valley. At maximum speed, 4 minutes. 4 minutes while his men died. He keyed the platoon net. All Warhorse 1 elements, emergency speed. I don't care about fuel conservation. I don't care about mechanical strain. We get there fast or we don't get there at all. Execute. The 4 tanks surged forward, turbines screaming at maximum power, throwing up massive rooster tails of sand and dust behind them. On the back deck, his father and Captain Chen clung to the handholds with white-knuckled grips as the tank bucked and lurched across the uneven terrain. 2 miles. The sound of artillery ahead, the flash of explosions on the horizon. 1 mile. The radio was chaos now. Multiple voices, tank commanders calling targets, loaders screaming up to indicate weapons ready. The distinctive crack of 120mm guns firing, and the deeper boom of incoming enemy rounds. Half a mile. Garrett could see it now through his night vision. The valley was a scene from hell. Tracers arcing through the darkness, muzzle flashes illuminating the smoke and dust like lightning in a thunderstorm. Burning vehicles casting an orange glow that ruined night vision but provided enough light to see the desperate nature of the fight. His 6 tanks were formed in a tight defensive circle, surrounded by Iraqi T-72s that were closing in like wolves around wounded prey. As Garrett watched, one of his tanks took a direct hit to the turret. The impact was tremendous, but the armor held. The tank kept fighting. All Warhorse 1 elements were coming in from the north. Friendlies approaching from your 6 o'clock. Do not engage us. Repeat, do not engage on approaching from north. He switched to the company net. All Warhorse elements, this is 6. The cavalry has arrived. First platoon is hitting them from behind. When we engage, they'll turn to face us. That's your window. Hit them hard. The 4 tanks of 1st Platoon crashed into the Iraqi rear like the hammer of an angry god. Doc Williams acquired his first target at 800 meters. A T-72 with its turret turned away, focused on the American tanks to its front. The Iraqi crew never knew what killed them. The sabot round punched through the rear armor where it was thinnest and turned the interior of the enemy tank into a blast furnace. Kowalski was already loading the next round before the first target stopped burning. Up! Target right! 700 meters, Doc called out. Firing! Another T-72 died. All around 1st Platoon, the other 3 tanks were doing the same, engaging from the flank and rear where Iraqi armor was most vulnerable, destroying targets with the methodical precision of men who had trained for this moment their entire careers. The Iraqi formation broke, caught between 2 American forces. Unable to concentrate their fire, the T-72s began to withdraw. Some reversed into defensive positions, others simply turned and fled. American tanks pursued them with disciplined fire, destroying the stragglers, letting the runners go because ammunition was too precious to waste on retreating targets. In 10 minutes, it was over. 20 Iraqi tanks destroyed in the valley, 4 more burning on the approaches. The desert floor was littered with the wreckage of what had been a Republican Guard armored company an hour ago. The price for the Americans: 2 tanks with mobility kills, tracks blown off by near misses. 1 tank with a damaged gun. 0 crew casualties, though several men were wounded by shrapnel that had found its way through vision blocks and hatches. Garrett's tank ground to a halt in the center of the defensive position. He stood in his hatch and looked at what remained of his company. 10 operational tanks. 4 damaged but repairable. 56 men who had stared death in the face and spat in its eye. His father and Captain Chen climbed off the back deck. His father was limping badly, his flight suit torn and bloody at the knee. But he was alive. He was standing. He was looking at his son with an expression that Garrett couldn't quite identify. Doc Williams opened his hatch and emerged from the turret. The gunner's face was black with soot and streaked with sweat. His eyes were red-rimmed from staring at the thermal sight for hours, but his hands were steady as he lit a cigarette with the ease of a man who had just completed a day's work. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. Garrett's father saw Doc and froze. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the space between tanks. Then his father spoke, his voice cracking. "You're Robert Williams' son. You look just like him." Doc Williams took a long drag on his cigarette. He exhaled slowly. "You knew my father." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested Doc had already guessed, had already figured it out, had spent the last 8 hours fighting alongside the son of the man he had never met while being commanded by the son of the man who had known his father. His father nodded, unable to speak. Doc Williams flicked ash from his cigarette. "He saved your life. Tet Offensive, 1968. Taught you how to fight outnumbered. Died a month later." Again, not questions. Statements. Doc knew, had always known, had probably researched his father's service, found the names of the men who had served with him, connected the dots that led from 1968 to 1991, from Vietnam to the Iraqi Desert, from father to son in an unbroken chain of men who climbed into metal machines and went to war. His father found his voice. "I should have told you, should have written to you, should have explained what your father meant to me. To all of us. He was the finest tank commander I ever knew. He saved my life, saved all of our lives, and I was too much of a coward to tell his son." Doc Williams took another drag. He looked at Garrett's father with eyes that had seen too much death too young, but still carried a fundamental kindness that war hadn't managed to destroy. "Sir, my father died doing his job, protecting his men. That's what tankers do. You didn't owe me an explanation. You owed him your survival. Looks like you paid that debt by teaching your son the same lessons. Cap here just saved all of us using tactics your generation learned in Vietnam. So I figure we're even." He extended his hand. Garrett's father took it. The two men shook, bridging a gap of 23 years and 10,000 miles in the unbearable weight of survival's guilt. The radio crackled, breaking the moment. "All Warhorse elements, this is Sabre 6, sitrep." Garrett keyed his mic, pulling his attention back to the present, back to the mission, back to the war that was still happening all around them. "Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, we have consolidated at defensive position. Enemy attack repulsed. 24 enemy tanks destroyed this engagement. Total company kills now 67 enemy tanks. We have casualties, wounded only, no KIA. We are combat effective and ready to continue operations." There was a pause. Then the battalion commander's voice came back, and there was something in it that sounded like disbelief mixed with pride. "Warhorse 6, say again. Did you just report 67 enemy kills?" "Affirmative, sir. 6-7 enemy tanks destroyed since H-hour." "Outstanding work, Captain. Be advised, 2nd Battalion is now 3 hours out. I need you to hold position until they arrive. After that, new orders. The Republican Guard Hammurabi Division is making a stand 30 miles south of your position. 7 Corps is launching a major attack at dawn. Your company will be part of the assault. You've bloodied them tonight. Tomorrow we break them." "How copy?" "Solid copy, sir. We'll be ready." "I know you will, Michael. Your grandfather would be proud." Sabre 6 out. Garrett looked at his father, who had heard the transmission. "Hammurabi Division. That's the unit you saw massing?" His father nodded. "Probably 100 tanks or more. Dug in, prepared positions. They're making their last stand. If 7 Corps doesn't break through there, this war drags on. More casualties, more time, more chances for things to go wrong. Then we break through," Garrett said simply. "That's what we do." His father smiled, but it was a sad smile, the smile of a man who knew what was coming and what it would cost. "Michael, I want you to understand something. What you did tonight, splitting your force, rescuing me, fighting your way back, that took courage, real courage. Not the kind they teach at West Point, the kind that comes from here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "Your grandfather had it. I had it once before Vietnam broke me. You have it now. Don't lose it. Don't let this war take it from you." "I won't, Dad. Promise me. Promise me that when this is over, when you come home, you'll remember that the men matter more than the mission. The lives matter more than the victory. That's the lesson I learned too late. Don't make the same mistake." Garrett looked at his crew, at Doc Williams smoking his cigarette, at Kowalski cleaning his loader's station with mechanical precision, at Dominguez finally emerging from the driver's hole, stretching muscles that had been cramped for 10 hours. He looked at the other tanks in his company, at the crews performing maintenance, reloading ammunition, treating wounds, checking systems, preparing for the next battle and the one after that and the one after that until this war finally ended and they could go home. "I promise, Dad. His father reached into his flight suit and pulled out something that he had been carrying, something he had protected through the ejection and the evasion and the rescue. A small wooden box, worn smooth by decades of handling. He opened it. Inside, resting on faded blue velvet, was a medal. Not the Medal of Honor that Garrett's grandfather had earned at Bastogne. Something different. Bronze. A star in the center. The Bronze Star Medal for Valor in Combat. This was mine, his father said quietly. Vietnam, 1968. They gave it to me after the action, where your gunner's father saved my life. I've carried it ever since. Reminded me of what I lost, what I failed to protect. But now I think it's time to pass it on. He held it out to Garrett. This represents the best day of my life. The day I learned what it meant to be a soldier. The day Robert Williams showed me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing your job anyway. You earned this tonight, son, you and your crew. Take it. Remember what it means. Garrett took the medal. The bronze was warm from his father's body heat. He could see the inscription on the back. For Valor, Lieutenant James Garrett, 1968. I'll treasure it, Dad. His father shook his head. Don't treasure it. Use it. Let it remind you every day that you come from a line of men who held the line when it mattered. Your grandfather at Bastogne. Me in Vietnam on my best day. You tonight. And someday, God willing, you'll have a son, and you'll pass it to him, and the line will continue. The night air was cold now. The temperature in the desert always dropped dramatically after sunset. Garrett's father was shivering in his flight suit, adrenaline wearing off, shock setting in. Medic, Garrett called out. I need a medic here. A young corpsman appeared, carrying his aid bag. He took one look at Garrett's father and immediately began treating the injured knee and the cuts on his face and hands. While the medic worked, Garrett's father kept talking, his voice getting weaker but more urgent, as if he needed to say these things before he lost the chance. Michael, there's something else. The tactics we used tonight, the way we baited them into firing first, the way we hit them during their reload cycle. That's all Vietnam-era thinking. But it works. The T-72 has the same vulnerability as the PT-76. 5 to 8 second reload time. Manual loader. Crew has to button up for protection during the loading sequence. That's when they're blinding. That's when you kill them. You taught us that tonight, Garrett said. Without meaning to, without knowing it, you gave us the key. His father managed a weak smile. Maybe I'm not completely useless after all. You were never useless, Dad. You were just wounded. But you're healing now. I can see it. The medic finished his work and moved to treat Captain Chen, who had been sitting quietly through the entire exchange, watching the father and son reunion with the detached interest of someone who recognized the importance of the moment but knew it wasn't her story. Garrett helped his father to a position where he could sit with his back against the tank's hull. The metal was still warm from the engine. His father closed his eyes and, for the first time since the rescue, allowed himself to relax. Around them, the company continued to prepare for the next battle. Ammunition was redistributed from damaged tanks to operational ones. Fuel trucks arrived from the battalion logistics train and topped off the tank's fuel cells. Mechanics worked on damaged vehicles, welding broken armor, replacing blown tracks, patching holes that shouldn't have been survivable, but were because American engineering was just that good. Garrett found Lieutenant Morrison, the second platoon leader, who had held the position during the rescue mission. The young officer looked exhausted but satisfied in the way that men look when they've done something impossible and survived it. You held, Garrett said simply. Morrison shrugged. Didn't have much choice, sir. You said hold, so we held. Lost some track links and burned through a lot of ammo, but yeah, we held. Your brother would have been proud. Morrison's face went carefully neutral. He had learned about his brother's death during the first battle, had processed it while under fire, had shoved the grief into a box that he would open later, somewhere private, somewhere safe. He was a good officer, sir. Taught me everything I know. I just wish I could have told him goodbye. You did, Garrett said. Every time you gave an order tonight, every time you kept your men alive, you were saying goodbye. You were honoring him. That's what soldiers do. We honor the dead by refusing to become them. Morrison nodded slowly. He understood. In time, the understanding would help with the grief. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. The radio crackled again. This time it was a transmission on the division command net, broadcast to all units in 7 Corps. All stations, all stations. This is Devil 6. Attack order follows. H-hour for assault on Hammurabi Division defensive line is 0500 hours, 27 February. All subordinate units will advance in sector and destroy enemy forces. This is the final push. We end this war tomorrow. Make every shot count. Devil 6 out. Garrett checked his watch. 27 February was 24 hours away. One more day, one more battle, one final push to break the last organized Iraqi resistance and end the ground war. His father heard the transmission. He opened his eyes and looked at his son. Tomorrow you're going to face their best. Hammurabi Division is Republican Guard. Elite, motivated, dug in. It's going to be the hardest fight of the war. I know, but you can win. You have better tanks, better training, better men. And now you have the tactics that work. Use them, bait them into firing, kill them during reload. Stay calm, stay professional, and bring every single one of your men home. Garrett knelt beside his father. Dad, when this is over, I want you to do something for me. Anything. I want you to come to Fort Hood when we get back. I want you to meet my men's families. I want you to look them in the eye and tell them what their sons and husbands and fathers did here. I want you to explain that we held the line, that we won, that we came home. His father's eyes filled with tears. Michael, I don't know if I can do that. Yes, you can, because you're healing, because you're remembering what it means to be a soldier, because you're my father and I need you to be there. The tears spilled over, running down his father's face, cutting clean tracks through the dirt and soot. I'll be there, son. I promise I'll be there. They sat together in the silence while around them the war continued. Soldiers worked. Machines rumbled. Radio traffic filled the night with the constant chatter of men coordinating violence. At 0300 hours, a convoy of trucks arrived carrying hot food, the first real meal the company had eaten in 30 hours. Garrett made sure every man got fed, made sure his father and Captain Chen got meals, made sure the wounded were comfortable. At 0400 hours, 2nd Battalion arrived, 14 fresh tanks with full ammunition and fuel, ready to take over the defensive position. Garrett's company was relieved. The men could finally stand down, finally let exhaustion catch up with them, finally process what they had been through. But not for long. At 0500 hours, orders came down. Warhorse Company would move to Tactical Assembly Area Eagle and join the rest of the brigade. At dawn, they would launch the final assault against Hammurabi Division. Garrett gathered his platoon leaders and gave them the brief. Simple orders, clear objectives. Everyone knew what had to be done. As the meeting broke up, Doc Williams pulled Garrett aside. Cap, I need to tell you something. Go ahead, Doc. Your father and I talked while you were getting orders. He told me about my dad, about Vietnam, about how my father saved his life and then died a month later. Garrett waited. I want you to know, I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm grateful. Grateful that my father's sacrifice meant something. Grateful that the man he saved had a son who became the kind of officer my father would have respected. Grateful that I got to serve with you. Doc, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Cap. Just keep leading the way you've been leading. Keep bringing us home. That's all any of us want. They shook hands in the darkness, two men bound by history and blood, and the strange alchemy that turns strangers into brothers when they share danger and survival. At 0530, Warhorse Company mounted up and began the movement to the assembly area. Garrett's father rode in the company command post vehicle, a modified M113 armored personnel carrier with extra radios and map tables. Captain Chen went with him, heading back to division headquarters for debriefing and medical evaluation. As the convoy prepared to move out, his father called Garrett over one last time. Michael, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. I'm proud of you. Proud of the man you have become. Proud of the officer you are. Your grandfather would be proud too. You're everything we hoped you would be, more than we had any right to expect. Garrett felt his throat tighten. Dad, I couldn't have done it without you. Without your lessons. Without your example, even the painful parts. You taught me what it costs to lead, what it costs to survive, what it costs to come home when others don't. That's worth more than any tactics manual. His father embraced him then, something he hadn't done since Garrett was a child. The hug was fierce and desperate and carried 20 years of regret and pain and love that had never found the right words. When they separated, both men had tears in their eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. The kind that wash away old wounds and leave clean scars that are stronger than the original flesh. I'll see you when this is over, his father said. And then we'll figure out how to be father and son again, the right way this time. I'd like that, Dad. The command post vehicle drove away, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Garrett watched until the taillights faded, then climbed back into his tank. Doc Williams was waiting in the turret. "You good, Cap?" Garrett settled into his commander's seat. He pulled his helmet on. He checked his displays and radios and weapon systems. He looked at the photo taped to the inside of his hatch. 3 generations, 3 wars, 3 tanks. Tomorrow would be the 4th battle, the final battle, the one that would determine whether he came home a hero or broken or something in between. "Yeah, Doc," he said quietly. "I'm good. Let's go finish this." The turbine engine whined to life. The tank began to move. Around them, the rest of the company formed up and followed. 10 operational tanks, 40 men. Every one of them tired, scared, determined, and ready to see this through to whatever end awaited them. The sky to the east began to lighten. Dawn was coming. With it would come the final battle, the last test, the ultimate measure of everything they had trained for, fought for, bled for. Garrett stood in his hatch and watched the horizon turn from black to gray to the first hints of gold. Somewhere 30 miles south, the Hammurabi Division waited in prepared positions. 100 tanks, dug in, determined, ready to fight to the last man. Against them, 7 corps, 3 armored divisions, hundreds of tanks, thousands of soldiers, the most powerful conventional military force assembled since World War II. And in the middle of it all, one company commander who had learned his lessons in blood and fire and family history, who had held the line when it mattered, who had rescued his father and saved his men and earned the right to lead them one more time. The radio crackled with the morning's first transmission. "All Warhorse elements, this is Sabre 6. Welcome to the last day of the war. Let's make it count." Garrett keyed his mic. "Sabre 6, Warhorse 6. Roger that, sir. We're ready." And he was. They all were. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, they would face it together. They would hold the line. They would honor the dead by refusing to become them. They were American tankers, sons and grandsons of men who had held other lines in other wars, heirs to a tradition of iron shaped by fire and tempered by sacrifice. Tomorrow would test that iron one final time. Tonight, they simply moved forward into the gathering light, carrying with them the weight of history and the hope of homecoming and the absolute certainty that whatever hell awaited them, they would face it the only way they knew how. Together, as soldiers, as brothers, as the inheritors of every hard lesson learned and every hard fight from Bastogne to Vietnam to the Iraqi Desert. The war was almost over. The final battle was about to begin, and Warhorse Company would be there when history was written. February 27, 1991, 0430 hours. Tactical Assembly Area Eagle, 40 miles inside Iraq, where the smell of diesel fuel and gun oil mixed with the cold desert air and the metallic taste of adrenaline that every soldier knows in the moments before battle. Captain Michael Garrett stood in the commander's hatch of his M1A1 Abrams and watched the horizon lighten from black to gray to the first pale hints of gold. Around him, the entire brigade was assembled. 70 tanks, hundreds of Bradley fighting vehicles, artillery batteries, support vehicles, the largest concentration of American armor since World War II, all pointed in one direction. South, toward the Hammurabi Division, toward the last organized resistance of the Iraqi Republican Guard, toward the final battle of the war. In 30 minutes, they would attack. In his map case, Garrett carried 3 things. His orders, typed on official paper with grids and phase lines and objectives marked in military precision. His father's Bronze Star from Vietnam, the medal still warm from being carried close to his heart, and a letter that had arrived in the mail convoy at 0300 hours, forwarded from the States, postmarked 2 weeks ago from Fort Hood, Texas. He had read the letter twice already. He would read it many more times in the years to come. But for now, the words were burned into his memory. "My dearest Michael," his wife Laura had written, "I know you're in the middle of a war. I know this is the worst possible time to tell you this. But I can't wait. I'm pregnant. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. It's a boy. We're going to have a son. Please come home safe. He needs to meet his father. I love you, Laura." A son, 4th generation Garrett. Another link in the chain that stretched from Bastogne to Vietnam to the Iraqi Desert and now forward into an unknowable future. Garrett touched the photo taped inside his hatch. His grandfather, stern and proud with his Medal of Honor. His father, haunted and young in the jungles of Vietnam. Himself at West Point, 21 years old, and certain he knew what war would be like. Now he knew better. War was not glory. War was not honor. War was metal and fire and math, and the terrible weight of sending men to die for objectives that looked simple on maps but cost everything to achieve. But war was also necessary, sometimes when the cause was just, when the alternative was worse, when liberation meant something more than a word in a speech. The radio crackled with the brigade commander's voice. All Sabre elements, this is Devil 6, H-hour and 30 minutes. Execute final pre-combat checks. Today we end this war. Make me proud. Devil 6 out. Garrett dropped into his turret. Doc Williams was already in the gunner's seat, face pressed against the thermal sight, scanning the southern horizon where satellite imagery showed the Iraqi defensive positions. Kowalski stood in the loader's station, hands moving through the mechanical ritual of checking ammunition racks and fire suppression systems. Below, in the driver's hole, Dominguez ran through his own checklist with the quiet competence of a man who had already proven himself in combat and had nothing left to prove. "Everybody ready?" Garrett asked. Doc Williams answered without taking his eye from the sight. "Born ready, Cap. Let's go finish this." Kowalski's voice was steadier now than it had been 3 days ago. Combat had a way of burning away uncertainty and leaving only what was essential. Fear remained, but it was a focused fear, a professional fear, the kind that kept you sharp instead of paralyzed. "Ready, sir? Let's send these bastards home." From the driver's station, Dominguez spoke in his Texas drawl. "Engines purring like a kitten, Cap. Well, a really loud, really angry kitten that weighs 63 tons. But yeah, we're good." Garrett smiled despite himself. These men, his crew, his brothers, they had held the line together. They had rescued his father together. They had survived together. Now they would finish this together. "All Warhorse elements. This is 6. Mount up. Final checks. We step off in 5 minutes. Stay tight, stay professional, and remember, we're not here to die for our country. We're here to make the other poor bastards die for theirs. Acknowledge." The acknowledgments came back quick and sharp. 10 tanks, 40 men, every one of them tired and scared and absolutely determined to see this through. At 04:55, the artillery barrage began. The sound was like the end of the world. 200 guns firing simultaneously. High explosive rounds screaming overhead in a continuous roar that shook the ground and compressed the air and made it hard to breathe. The Iraqi positions 3 miles south disappeared under a curtain of fire and smoke and flying metal. For 10 minutes, the barrage continued, destroying bunkers, destroying tanks, destroying men who had made the mistake of fighting on the wrong side of a war they couldn't win. When the guns fell silent, the sudden quiet was almost painful. "All Sabre elements, this is Devil 6, H-hour, execute, execute, execute." 70 American tanks lurched forward in a line that stretched across 3 miles of desert. The turbines screamed, the tracks clattered. The ground trembled beneath the weight of 4,000 tons of armor, moving at 25 miles per hour toward an enemy that had nowhere to run. Garrett stood in his hatch and watched his sector. 1st platoon on his left, 2nd platoon on his right, 3rd platoon in reserve behind him. The company moved in textbook formation, intervals perfect, guns oriented forward, every commander scanning for targets through thermal sights that could see through the smoke and dust. 2 miles. The Iraqi positions were visible now through the haze. Earthen berms, dug-in tanks, prepared defenses that had been photographed by satellites and studied by intelligence officers and marked on every map the Americans carried. 1 mile, still no return fire. The artillery had done its job, or the Iraqis were waiting. Discipline, fire control, letting the enemy close before springing the trap. 1/2 mile, Doc Williams spoke calmly. "Cap, I'm picking up thermals. Multiple signatures, tanks, a lot of them, hold down positions. They survived the barrage." "How many?" Doc was quiet for a moment, counting. 30 plus in our sector, maybe more behind the ridgeline. This is going to get ugly." "It always does," Garrett said. "Target priority is tanks first, then fighting positions. Long-range shots. Keep moving. Don't let them fix us in place." At 1,200 meters, the Iraqis opened fire. The first indication was a series of muzzle flashes along the ridgeline, then the sound, that distinctive crack of 125mm guns firing in salvo. Then the impacts, rounds screaming in and hitting all around the advancing American formation. Most missed. A few didn't. Garrett watched as one of 2nd Platoon's tanks took a direct hit to the frontal armor. The round penetrated. The tank stopped moving, smoke pouring from the engine deck. The crew bailed out, running for cover while their vehicle burned. First American loss of the day. It wouldn't be the last. All Warhorse elements, enemy tanks at 11 to 1 o'clock, range 1.100 meters. Engage at will. The company opened fire. 10 120-meter guns speaking with one voice. The sound was thunder compressed into a single continuous roar. Doc Williams fired. Kowalski loaded. The rhythm that had kept them alive for 3 days continued without pause. Target destroyed, up, fire, target destroyed, up, fire. At 800 meters, the Iraqi line began to crumble. 20 T-72s destroyed in the first 3 minutes of the engagement. But Iraqi reinforcements were moving up from positions behind the ridge. For every tank destroyed, another appeared to take its place. Warhorse 6, this is 2-6. We're getting hit from the left flank. T-62s moving to enfilade our position. Request permission to shift fire. Negative 2-6, hold your sector. 3-6, shift your platoon left and engage those T-62s. I need 2-6 focused forward. The battle developed with brutal speed. What had been a coordinated advance became a swirling, close-range brawl as Iraqi tanks abandoned their prepared positions and closed to ranges where even their inferior equipment could score kills. At 500 meters, a T-72 got a lucky shot on Warhorse 3-2. The round hit the turret ring, the weak point where the turret met the hull. The tank didn't explode, but it stopped turning. The crew was alive, but combat ineffective. At 300 meters, Garrett's own tank took a hit. The impact sounded like a giant hammer striking an anvil. The armor held, but the shockwave inside the turret was tremendous. Garrett's vision went white. His ears rang. For a moment, he couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whine. Then Doc Williams' voice cut through the noise. "Sir, you okay?" Garrett shook his head, trying to clear it. His nose was bleeding. He could taste copper. "I'm fine. Keep shooting. That round should have killed us. But it didn't. Keep shooting." Doc Williams went back to his sight, acquired a target, fired. Another Iraqi tank died. The battle raged for 20 minutes. Close range, brutal, no finesse. Just who could shoot faster and more accurately while taking fire from multiple directions. The Americans had better technology, but the Iraqis had numbers and desperation. When it was over, 30 Iraqi tanks were burning, 4 American tanks were disabled, 2 American tanks were destroyed, crews killed. The brigade pushed through the first defensive line and kept moving. But everyone knew the worst was yet to come. The first line had been the screening force. The main defense was still ahead. At 0600 hours, as the sun cleared the horizon and lit the desert with harsh golden light, the radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Any Warhorse element, this is Anvil 26. How copy? Garrett recognized the call sign, Anvil Company, 2nd Brigade Reconnaissance Unit. They should have been 30 miles west, scouting the flank. Anvil 26, this is Warhorse 6. I copy you, Lima Charlie. What's your status? The voice that came back was strained, desperate, but disciplined. Warhorse 6, we're what's left of our company. Got cut off yesterday during the advance. We're 30 men, no vehicles, 5 miles north of the main Iraqi defensive line. We've been evading for 18 hours. They're hunting us. We need immediate extraction. Garrett felt his stomach tighten. 30 men. Cut off, deep in enemy territory. The math was brutal. Send tanks to extract them and weaken the main assault. Leave them and 30 American soldiers die. Anvil 26, who is your commander? Sir, I'm Lieutenant David Morrison. Garrett's blood went cold. Morrison, the same last name as his 2nd platoon leader. The brother who had died holding the valley 3 days ago. Lieutenant Morrison, this is Captain Garrett. Are you related to Lieutenant Thomas Morrison, 2nd Platoon, Warhorse Company? There was a pause. Then the voice came back, and it was breaking. Yes, sir. Tom was my brother. Sir, is he alive? Garrett closed his eyes. This was the hardest part of command. Harder than tactical decisions. Harder than risking your own life. Telling a man his brother was dead. Lieutenant Morrison, your brother died 3 days ago, holding a defensive position that saved this entire company. He died a hero. He saved a lot of lives. The radio was silent for a long moment. Then David Morrison's voice came back, steady despite the grief that must have been tearing him apart. Sir, then I need to finish what he started. Get us out of here so we can keep fighting. That's what Tom would want. Garrett looked at his tactical display. The main assault was developing. His company was needed on the line. Every tank mattered, but so did 30 American soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. He made the decision in 3 seconds. All Warhorse elements. This is 6. Doc Williams, you have tactical command of 1st Platoon. Take 3 tanks and extract Anvil 2-6. Get those men out. I'll continue the assault with remaining forces. Doc Williams didn't hesitate. Roger, sir. 1st Platoon on me. We've got Americans to save. 3 tanks peeled off from the formation and raced north. Garrett continued south with 6 tanks. The numbers were getting worse. 6 American tanks against whatever the Hammurabi division had left. Maybe 60 Iraqi tanks. Maybe more. But Lieutenant Morrison's brother needed rescue, and Garrett's didn't leave men behind. The main Iraqi defensive line appeared ahead. A ridge line 3 miles long, honeycombed with prepared positions. Hold-down tanks, dug-in infantry, anti-tank missiles. This was where the Hammurabi division had chosen to make its last stand. Garrett's radio crackled with the brigade commander's voice. All Sabre elements, this is Devil 6. Enemy strength at objective is confirmed at 60 plus tanks. They're dug in deep. This is going to cost us, but we're going through them. No stopping, no turning back. Execute the assault. 6 tanks, 60 tanks. The math was impossible. Garrett keyed his mic to the company net. All Warhorse elements, you heard the man? We're going in. Stay close. Support each other. Make every shot count. And remember, we've been outnumbered before. We're still here. They're not. The 6 tanks accelerated toward the ridgeline. At 2,000 meters, the Iraqis opened fire with everything. Tank guns, anti-tank missiles, artillery. The world became fire and smoke, and the constant scream of incoming rounds. At 1,500 meters, Warhorse 2-4 took a missile hit. The tank exploded, catastrophic kill, crew lost instantly. 5 tanks left. At 1,000 meters, the volume of fire was so intense that Garrett couldn't see the enemy positions through the smoke. He was navigating by GPS and instinct, trusting Doc's training to guide him, trusting Kowalski's speed to keep the gun firing, trusting Dominguez's skill to keep them moving and alive. At 800 meters, his radio crackled with a transmission on a frequency he hadn't used before. Navy frequency, the same one Ghost 7 had used during his father's rescue. Warhorse 6, this is USS Henderson, destroyer operating in the Persian Gulf. We monitored your tactical situation. We have 5-inch guns, range 12 miles. You're 8 miles inland. If you can designate targets, we can provide fire support. How copy? Garrett's mind raced. Naval gunfire support. Saturate the Iraqi positions from the sea. But someone needed to be forward, on the ground, with a laser designator to guide the shells. Someone needed to walk into the killing zone and paint targets while Iraqi guns tried to kill them. It was suicide, but it might be the only way to break through. Henderson, Warhorse 6, solid copy. Stand by for target coordinates. He switched to the battalion net. Sabre 6, Warhorse 6, I need a forward observer to designate for naval gunfire. Who do you have available? The battalion commander's voice came back. Warhorse 6, I have no forward observers in your sector. You'll have to designate from your tank. Garrett knew that wouldn't work. The tank needed to keep moving, keep fighting. If he stopped to designate, he'd be a stationary target, dead in minutes. He needed someone on foot, someone brave enough or crazy enough to walk into hell with a laser designator and stay alive long enough to guide shells onto target. His father's voice came over the battalion liaison frequency. Colonel James Garrett, who had been monitoring the battle from the command post vehicle, who had heard his son's dilemma, who understood exactly what was needed. Michael, this is your father. I'm 500 meters behind your position. I have a laser designator. I can do this. Garrett's blood froze. Dad, negative. You're not combat qualified. You're wounded. This is a job for a trained forward observer. Michael, I did this in Vietnam. I know how it works. And there's no one else. You need naval fire or you're going to die on that ridge. Let me do this. Dad, it's a suicide mission. They'll see you. They'll kill you. His father's voice was calm, resolved. The voice of a man who had made his peace with what needed to be done. Son, I've been running from this moment for 23 years, since Vietnam, since I survived when better men died. I'm done running. Let me do this. Let me help you win. Garrett's hands were shaking. He was asking his father to walk into fire, asking him to dare so that others could live. It was the calculus of war, cold and brutal and necessary. But it was still his father. Doc Williams spoke quietly over the intercom. Cap, he's right. We need that fire support, and there's no one else. Garrett knew it was true, hated that it was true, but knew it. He keyed his radio. Dad, if you do this, you stay low, you keep moving. You get those targets designated, and then you get out. You understand me? His father's voice held a note of something that might have been pride or might have been love or might have been both. I understand, son. I'll be careful. The command post vehicle stopped 600 meters short of the ridgeline. Garrett watched through his commander's sight as his father climbed out, carrying a laser designator, limping on his injured leg, and began walking toward the Iraqi positions. Henderson, Warhorse 6. We have a designator on the ground. Stand by for coordinates. His father's voice came over the fire support net. Henderson, this is Designator 1. I have multiple targets. T-72s, hold down positions, bearing 270 from my position. Range 400 meters, request fire mission. Henderson's professional voice responded. Designator 1, Henderson, roger, rounds in the air in 60 seconds. Danger close. Take cover. Garrett watched his father crouch behind a small berm. The laser designator pointed at the Iraqi positions. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. Then the sky opened up. The naval shells came in with a sound like freight trains falling from heaven. 5-inch rounds, 20 pounds of high explosive each, guided by his father's laser. They impacted along the ridgeline in a rolling curtain of fire that obliterated everything in their path. 12 Iraqi tanks destroyed in the first salvo. His father was already moving, designating new targets. Iraqi infantry spotted him. Machine gun fire kicked up sand around his position. He kept the laser steady. Henderson, Designator 1, adjust fire left 200 meters. Multiple targets, fire for effect. The second salvo hit. 10 more Iraqi tanks destroyed. But the Iraqis had found the source of the designation. They were concentrating fire on his father's position. Artillery rounds walked toward him, each impact getting closer. Garrett was screaming into his radio. Dad, move! Get out of there! His father's voice came back, strained but determined. Not yet. Still have targets. Adjusting fire. A third salvo. 8 more tanks destroyed. Then Garrett saw it. His father stumbling, falling. The laser designator still pointed at the enemy, but his father was down, hit, wounded, or worse. Garrett didn't think. He just moved. Dominguez, stop the tank. The Abrams ground to a halt. Garrett was already opening his hatch, grabbing his M4 rifle, climbing out of the turret. Doc Williams' voice was shouting, Cap, what are you doing? Getting my father. He ran, 400 meters across open ground while Iraqi guns fired at anything that moved. Rounds cracked past his head. Explosions threw up geysers of sand and rock. He kept running. His father was lying in a shallow depression, blood spreading across his flight suit from a wound in his side. The laser designator was next to him, still functional. Garrett grabbed his father under the arms and began dragging him back toward the tank. His father's eyes open, focused on his son. Michael, you idiot! I told you to stay in the tank. And I told you, Dad, we bring everyone home. Iraqi infantry was advancing. Small arms fire getting closer. Garrett fired his M4 one-handed while dragging his father with the other. Behind him, Doc Williams had taken over the tank's commander's position and was providing covering fire with the coaxial machine gun. 200 meters. Garrett's lungs were burning. His legs were shaking. His father was dead weight, barely conscious. 100 meters. An Iraqi round hit the sand 2 feet away. Shrapnel tore through Garrett's left arm. He didn't stop. 50 meters. Doc Williams and Kowalski were out of the tank now, running to help, grabbing his father, carrying him the last distance while Garrett provided covering fire. They got his father onto the back deck of the tank. The medic from 2nd Platoon appeared from somewhere, already working on the wound, starting an IV, calling for medevac. Garrett climbed back into the turret. His arm was bleeding but functional. Adrenaline was keeping the pain at bay. Doc Williams was in the gunner's seat, staring at him. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen, Cap. Garrett keyed his radio to the fire support net. Henderson, Warhorse 6. Designator 1 is wounded, but we have the laser. Continuing mission. He took control of the laser designator from where his father had dropped it. The Iraqi positions were in chaos now, disrupted by the naval bombardment. But there were still tanks, still fighting positions, still an enemy that needed to be destroyed. Garrett designated targets from his commander's hatch, while Doc Williams engaged with the main gun. The combined arms attack, naval guns and tank guns working together, tore through the Iraqi defenses with overwhelming violence. In 30 minutes, it was over. The Hammurabi division's last defensive line had been broken. 40 Iraqi tanks destroyed by naval fire, 20 more destroyed by tank guns. The survivors were retreating south, abandoning their positions, fleeing toward Basra and the imagined safety of their homeland. The war was over. They just didn't know it yet. Garrett's tank ground to a halt. Around him, the rest of his company was regrouping. Doc Williams in 1st Platoon had returned with 30 rescued soldiers from Anvil Company, including Lieutenant David Morrison, who looked exhausted and grateful and heartbroken all at once. The medevac helicopter landed 20 minutes later. Garrett helped carry his father to the bird. The medics had stabilized him. The wound was serious but not fatal. He would live. Before the helicopter took off, his father grabbed Garrett's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Michael, you saved my life, again." Garrett shook his head. "No, Dad, you saved mine. You and every man who held the line before us. We're all just paying forward what was given to us." His father smiled. "Your son is going to be proud of you." Garrett stared. "How did you know about that?" "I'm your father. I know things. Take care of him. Teach him what we've learned. The good parts, not the broken parts." "I will, Dad, I promise." The helicopter lifted off, carrying his father toward a field hospital and surgery and recovery in a future that neither of them had been certain would exist 3 days ago. Garrett stood in the desert and watched the helicopter disappear. Around him, his company was conducting after-action checks, counting losses, redistributing ammunition, treating wounded, the mechanical rituals that came after combat and kept men from thinking too hard about what they just survived. Doc Williams approached, lighting a cigarette with hands that were finally, for the first time in 3 days, shaking. "We did it, Cap. We broke them." Garrett nodded slowly. "We broke them, but it cost us." Final casualty count for Warhorse Company: 4 tanks destroyed, 11 men killed in action, 23 wounded. Out of 14 tanks and 56 men, only 9 tanks were still operational, and 33 men still combat effective. But they had held the line. They had completed the mission. They had won. At 1200 hours, the radio broadcast that everyone had been waiting for. All stations, this is Devil 6. President Bush has announced a ceasefire effective immediately. The ground war is over. 100 hours of combat. We have liberated Kuwait. We have destroyed the Iraqi Republican Guard as an effective fighting force. You are ordered to cease offensive operations and consolidate positions. Well done. Devil 6 out. The war was over. Garrett sat on the hull of his tank and tried to process it. 4 days ago, he had crossed the border into Iraq, uncertain and afraid and carrying the weight of 2 previous generations. Now he was sitting in the Iraqi desert, exhausted and wounded and victorious. His crew gathered around him: Doc Williams, Kowalski, Dominguez, the men who had kept him alive, the men he had kept alive. Kowalski was crying, not bothering to hide it. "We're going home, Cap. We're actually going home." "Yeah, kid, we're going home." 3 weeks later, back at the assembly area in Saudi Arabia, after the equipment had been cleaned, and the reports had been written, and the dead had been honored, and the wounded had been evacuated, Warhorse Company stood in formation for an awards ceremony. Garrett received the Silver Star for his actions during the rescue of his father and the assault on the Hammurabi Division defensive line. Doc Williams received the Silver Star for leading the rescue of Anvil Company while under fire. Kowalski and Dominguez received Bronze Stars for valor. Every member of the company received the Combat Action Badge. But the ceremony that mattered most came 3 days later, when a special guest arrived at the base. Colonel William Garrett, 86 years old, in a wheelchair, wearing his World War II uniform with the Medal of Honor around his neck. He had flown from Pennsylvania to Saudi Arabia, defying doctors' orders to see his grandson. Captain James Garrett, recovered from surgery and walking with a cane, stood beside him. 3 generations of Garretted tankers stood together in the Saudi Arabian sun. Grandfather, father, son. Colonel William Garrett held Michael's Silver Star in hands that trembled with age but still held strength. "You held the line, boy," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Just like Bastogne. Just like every Garrett has done when it mattered. I'm proud of you." Michael knelt beside his grandfather's wheelchair. "I learned from the best, sir. You and Dad. You showed me what it means to be a soldier. What it has. What it's worth." His grandfather reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a medal, Not his Medal of Honor. Something else. A small bronze star on a ribbon. "This was your great-grandfather's," he said quietly. "My father, he earned it in World War I. Belleau Wood, he held a trench for 3 days against German attacks. When I went to Bastogne, I carried it with me. Now I'm giving it to you. 4 generations, Michael. 4 generations of men who held the line." Michael took the medal with shaking hands. "I'll treasure it." "No," his grandfather said, echoing what his father had said weeks earlier. "Don't treasure it. Use it. Let it remind you every day that you're part of something bigger than yourself. You're part of a line of men who stood when standing mattered. And someday, you'll have a son and you'll pass it to him." Michael thought of Laura's letter, of the sun growing inside her. "I already do, grandfather. I already do." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "Then make sure he knows, make sure he understands. The iron shaped by fire, the line that doesn't break." "I will, sir, I promise." 6 months later, Fort Hood, Texas, November 1991. Laura Garrett held her newborn son in the hospital room while her husband stood beside her, still in his Army uniform, home from the war for 3 months now, but still processing what he'd experienced. The baby was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair, eyes that would eventually turn the same shade of blue as his great-great-grandfather's. They named him William James Garrett IV, William for his great-grandfather who had held Bastogne, James for his grandfather who had survived Vietnam, Garrett for the line that stretched back through generations of men who had worn the uniform and carried the burden. Michael's father held his grandson for the first time, tears streaming down his face. "I promise you, William," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "you'll know what your great-grandfather did, what your grandfather did, what your father did. You'll know what it means to be a Garrett." 10 years later, September 11, 2001. The television showed the Twin Towers burning. Michael Garrett, now a major, sat with his 10-year-old son, William, and watched the world change in real time. William looked up at his father. "Dad, are you going back to war?" Michael thought of Iraq, of the desert, of the burning tanks and the dead men, and the impossible choices that commanders made every day. "If my country calls, yes. Can I come with you?" Michael looked at his son, seeing in his face the same determination that had driven 3 generations before him. The same sense of duty, the same willingness to stand when standing was needed. "Someday, son, when you're ready, but I hope you never have to." 9 years later, May 2010, West Point, New York. Cadet William James Garrett IV stood at attention in his dress gray uniform, receiving his diploma and his commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. Branch assignment, armor, tanks, like his father, like his grandfather, like his great-grandfather, like his great-great-grandfather. In the audience, 3 generations watched with pride and fear and the knowledge of what that choice meant. Michael Garrett, now Lieutenant Colonel, retired from active duty after 24 years of service. James Garrett, 72 years old, frail but present, remembering his own service decades ago. And in spirit, William Garrett, who had passed away in 2005 at the age of 86, but whose legacy lived on in the men who followed. After the ceremony, William approached his father. "I want to deploy, Dad. Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever they send me, I want to serve." Michael looked at his son and saw himself at 22. Young, eager, certain of what was right, not yet understanding what war would cost. "Then serve well, son. Lead with honor. Bring your men home. That's all any of us can do." 15 years later, November 2025, Arlington National Cemetery. Colonel James Garrett was buried with full military honors on a cold morning when the leaves had fallen and the sky was the color of gunmetal. He had lived to be 87 years old, long enough to see his grandson return from Afghanistan with a Bronze Star, long enough to meet his great-grandson James Michael Garrett, long enough to know that the line would continue. The funeral detail fired 3 volleys. A bugler played taps. The flag was folded with crisp precision and presented to the family. 4 generations of Garrett men stood at the graveside. Michael, 61 years old, retired colonel. William, 34 years old, captain, recently returned from his 3rd deployment. Young James, 5 years old, wearing a miniature uniform, not understanding death, but understanding that this moment was important. Michael held his great-grandfather's Bronze Star from World War I, his father's Bronze Star from Vietnam, his own Silver Star from the Gulf War, his son's Bronze Star from Afghanistan. 4 generations, 4 wars, 4 medals representing 4 lives dedicated to service. He knelt beside young James and placed the medals in his small hands. These belong to Garretts who held the line, he said quietly. Your great-great-grandfather earned this one in France. Your great-grandfather earned this one in Vietnam. I earned this one in Iraq. Your father earned this one in Afghanistan. 4 generations of men who stood when standing mattered. Someday you'll understand what that means. The boy looked at the medals with wide eyes. Grandpa, are you a hero? Michael looked at his son William, remembering all the battles they'd both fought. He looked at the rows of white headstones stretching to every horizon, each one marking a life given in service. No, James. Heroes are the ones who didn't come home. We're just the ones who held the line long enough for them to matter. Behind them, thousands of markers bore witness to that truth. Soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines, men and women who had given everything so that others could have a future. Michael stood and saluted his father's grave. His son William saluted beside him. Young James, not understanding but knowing it was important, raised his small hand in an approximation of a salute. 3 generations, honoring the 4th, bound together by service and sacrifice, and the unbreakable line that connected them across decades and wars and the endless march of history. As they walked back through the cemetery, Michael thought of his grandfather's words, the iron shaped by fire, the line that doesn't break. The burden passed from father to son across generations, each carrying it as far as they could before passing it on to the next. Behind them, the sun broke through the clouds and illuminated the white markers with gold light. The day was cold, but the light was warm. Death was everywhere, but so was memory. So was honor. So was the promise that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth remembering forever. Michael Garrett took his grandson's hand and his son's arm, and they walked together through Arlington, through history, through the accumulated weight of all the men who had held the line before them and all the men who would hold it after. The war was over. The line remained, and 4 generations of Garretts stood together, proof that some legacies were stronger than death, more enduring than metal, more powerful than fire. They had held the line. They would always hold the line. That was what Garretts did. End of part 3. Epilogue. The forge in Pennsylvania still operates. Michael Garrett runs it now, making horseshoes and tools and teaching his grandson the craft that his great-great-grandfather practiced between wars. The metal glows red in the fire. The hammer falls with rhythmic precision. The steel bends and shapes and hardens. In the workshop, mounted on the wall, 5 medals hang in a row. Bronze Star, World War I. Medal of Honor, World War II. Bronze Star, Vietnam. Silver Star, Gulf War. Bronze Star, Afghanistan. 5 generations. 5 wars. 5 men who answered when called. The forge fire burns hot and steady, just as it has for over a century, just as it will for generations to come. Because some things endure, some traditions matter, some legacies are worth preserving. Iron shaped by fire, tempered by sacrifice, strengthened by honor, held by men who understand that the line must never break. Not in France, not in Belgium, not in Vietnam, not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan. Not ever. The hammer falls, the metal rings, the fire burns bright, and the line holds. The end.